20 years ago, the conversation in Pittsburgh was, how do we get the engine going again? 10 years ago, the conversation in Pittsburgh was, how do we get the engine going? All of a sudden, the engine's humming, and the question is, which way do we want to go? To me, the greatest danger is that we begin to believe our own PR and think that all of these best of lists that we've appeared on tell the whole story of what has to come next.
Pittsburgh is uniquely positioned to forge a new model for urban growth because it's got at its base a very innovative economy that's concentrated in a relatively small geography.
It wasn't steel that built Pittsburgh, it was innovation. A new model about how cities grow. Not just how many economic development dollars have been invested, but how many people's lives it has changed for the better. But the fact is, we're not doing it for everybody.
We want to bring more people along for the ride, good jobs, better jobs, well-paying jobs, but sustainable growth, sustainable development. We want to grow our economy essentially while lowering carbon emissions.
We've got the authentic places, we've got the great arts resources, we've got the universities, we've got these spaces where development pressures are beginning to happen.
All of those things create a unique atmosphere that you can only find in one place. What we need to do is find ways to enhance it. There are certain moments in any city's history where you're at a crossroads, and I think Pittsburgh's there. We're sitting at an opportunity to build something new.
We're about to undergo, for example, the largest wave of major development in 20, 30, maybe even more years. Hundreds upon hundreds of prime acreage coming online, and we have to ask ourselves a question. Do we want to use this as a moment to define Pittsburgh as a city of the future by setting high standards around design excellence, design quality, sustainability?
The new geography of innovation in the 21st century is urban. Cities and metropolitan areas are the engines of our economy. They're the centers of trade and investment. If we're going to solve the challenges of this century, cities are going to be the places where we do it.
P4 concept ultimately really is about how we create a great Pittsburgh. If you look at planet, people, place, and performance, how do you use those attributes to create something unique in Pittsburgh that is special and amazing? If you had to pick the top cities in the world that are really defining what cities are going to look like, where would you go?
You go to Copenhagen, you go to Stockholm, you go to the Nordic countries, because they have basically willed themselves to a sustainable future.
The analysis that they use isn't a single bottom line about what the financial impact will be, but how it will affect the planet, how it will affect the people, and how it will create unique places.
You're taking the best from the Nordic countries. You're taking the best from other cities in the United States and Europe and beyond. You're inventing something new, a new kind of placemaking around innovation. And then once you do that, others will look at Pittsburgh and say, that's the new model.
It's a new economy. There's new thoughts coming about what that next city will look like. And we're right at the cusp of what I believe is something great.
Really, the most important question for Pittsburgh is not what we did over the last 10 or 20 years, but what we do right now.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Pittsburgh's Mayor, William Peduto.
Good morning. Good morning, and welcome to the next chapter of Pittsburgh. For those who are visiting, let me see a show of hands for the people that are visiting Pittsburgh, and keep your hand up if this is your first time to our city. A few. Well, welcome. I'm going to give you a little brief history of Pittsburgh and then let this program begin. Pittsburgh started, and when I say the next chapter of Pittsburgh, what I mean is we've gone through a couple different time periods. In the way that I view it, we're on chapter 4. Chapter 1, back in 1753, the French came here and they looked at this area and they saw it as the gateway to the West. And they saw it as far as the New World would go. And they set up a fort called Fort Duquesne at the confluence of the rivers. And they set it up, and along came a young major into the Virginia militia, and his name was George Washington. And he marched over the Laurel Highlands, and he said, wait a minute, we want this land for the British. And they loved us so much, they fought the First World War over us. And soon it became known as Pittsburgh, a Scottish general named Forbes, naming it for the British Prime Minister, William Pitt, who put so much into that war. And Pittsburgh existed in that little area down at the point, and soon they started to develop a road system, a grid system, that is confusing still to this day and collides into itself. And until around the 1816, around that area, we were that, a little borough, a western frontier town. And in 1816, we went to Harrisburg, and we said, we want to become a city. And Harrisburg granted us. That was the last time Harrisburg gave the city of Pittsburgh anything, by the way. And Ebenezer Denny became the mayor. So chapter 1, western frontier town, the gateway to the west. Chapter 2 begins, the industrial city. A couple of guys got in a boat down right by Heinz Field. Their names were Lewis and Clark, and they set off. And all of a sudden, this wasn't the western frontier anymore. This was the beginning of a new nation, and they needed somebody to build it. And they looked over their shoulders, and they looked back to Pittsburgh. And first it was glass, and then it was iron, and then steel and aluminum, and we built America. And with it came great wealth, and we built out beautiful places, places that are still here, part of the 19th century that we took with us. But at the same time, we created a system that had broken down between the haves and the have-nots, between the ones that owned the mills and those that worked in the mills. And it took years and decades for us to be able to build something else other than steel. We built the middle class. In places like Pittsburgh, in Cleveland, in Detroit, the middle class was built. And it became also a problem between the seeking of profit that we also destroyed our environment. We had air that was dangerous to breathe. We had water that was poisonous to drink. But like Pittsburghers, we went about solving it. And it wasn't just the legacy of people like Carnegie and Mellon. And I kind of wish at times that Andrew Carnegie and Frick didn't hate each other, because if they had partnered together in the university, we could call it Carnegie, Frick, and Mellon. But it was built on others. It was built on Rachel Carson, who had the guts and the gumption to march up the steps of Congress to fight for clean water. It was built by people like David Lawrence, who put in place the first clean air standards in the country to be able to solve it. It was built by that partnership between Mellon and Lawrence to create the Allegheny Conference. And they weren't fighting for lower taxes, they were fighting for clean water. They were fighting for clean air. And Pittsburgh began a new phase, from the industrial giant to the Renaissance. And in chapter 3, we saw the Renaissance and the collapse. We invested in infrastructure that built these amazing bridges and tunnels, and we basically built the system that saw our region sprawl and decline. We built driveways for people to move out of the city. We took the bulldozer and the wrecking ball to communities in order for progress. We saw a different type of model that was based upon how the place could be convenient by automobile. And in that process, we saw the city lose its population. And eventually, when the collapse did come, we saw the people and the corporations move out. And that phase took us through a lot of different eras. You know, back during the days of Lawrence, we planned to build convention centers and stadiums and airports. And then we tore them down and built convention centers and stadiums and airports. And we did this with public money. And now, as we are starting to get to the next phase, that next chapter, we have an opportunity and an obligation to realize how we can use those limited public dollars to build out that next phase. And we can look back to our past and say, how do we make it so that it's an economy for everyone? So we don't recreate 1920 when those in the mill weren't able to sustain themselves and those that own the mills were able to get extremely wealthy. How do we make it so that it is involving the environment? So we can look back and see how David Lawrence and the corporate community got together to make sure that before the word sustainable was even invented, that we were building something that would be there in the future. How do we make sure that it is unique? How do we get those treasures that have been left to us from the 19th century, preserve them and add on to them so that the next chapter of Pittsburgh doesn't take away from that uniqueness, that screwiness, that perfection that even in the 80s when we were on our knees, people knew and loved Pittsburgh. And how do we measure it so that we know we're actually doing it and not just talking about it? That's P4, to make sure that planet and people, place and performance are the metrics that we use as we build out this next chapter of Pittsburgh. This is a wonderful, wonderful time to be a Pittsburgher. We have the opportunity to build on something that is so great and to add upon it the real true measurement of being a 21st century city that other cities will want to follow. And it only happens through partnership. And that's why it's my honor to be able to introduce Andre Hines. Andre and I had a conversation about a year ago about what we can do to get the best practice models from around the world and bring them to Pittsburgh. To have the opportunity to learn how it works, because it does work. But we have to all get behind it. And at the same time, allow people to come to Pittsburgh to see the wonderful things that are happening here. And without Andre's support, this would never have happened. This is a stage for Pittsburgh to get back onto the global scene. And because of the support that he has been able to provide, because of the understanding and the vision that he has in his heart, and because of the love that his family has had for this city for nearly 200 years, we're gathered here today to start that next chapter. My friend, Mr. Andre Hines.
That was very nice. That was great. Every time you give a public talk, there's a little bit of butterfly activity in your stomach, but then when Bill comes out and makes everyone laugh repeatedly, it only gets much worse. So don't expect, there you go, thank you. That was the laugh I was looking for. It makes it so much easier. It's really great to be here and see you all here. I love it when the mayor contextualizes Pittsburgh, especially for people who've never been here before. It is a remarkable town with a remarkable history that has an evolving story. And you are all part of that story. So for I couldn't see the hands being raised, but for everybody who's a local person, you are part of that evolving, unfolding history that will be told with pride and with excitement. For those of you who are from out of town, thank you for coming. This is, with the weather cooperating as it is and with this view, we get very proud ourselves to be able to show off our city. And to me, it is a very natural thing to have happen for Pittsburgh. This has been a town that has benefited from something that I think we hold dear, even if at times we take it for granted, which is we actually have a functioning, innate sense of community here. We are, maybe you could say it's a function of scale, it's a function of history, it's a function of island biogeography. The fact of the matter is, it's a lovely town with nice people who like to work together. And that is part of the reason why this bridge, I think the mayor's instinct was quite remarkable when he said, I would like to also learn more about what's been going on in Scandinavia, where you've been spending a lot of time studying some of the successes in that model. And you might say, the social cohesion that you have there, in many respects, mirrors what occurs here, even though they may unfold differently. And so that's sort of the genesis of what is a quite exciting gathering. And over the next 2 days, what we hope to hear about is a shared experience of what people have discovered in their attempts to address the topics of people, planet, place, and performance. So I'd like to say really just a few shout outs and thank yous. First of all, to our co-host, Mayor Peduto, who is remarkable, and without whom, truly, that question never would have been asked, and this would not have occurred. I'd say, so thanks, Bill, for sure. And, they say behind every great man that, well, in his case, there's an army. Bill has a staff of remarkable people who chose to leave great jobs in sexy cities like New York and California, places in California, to come here in response to his call for quality, in response to, we're looking for people who are the best in their field. And they have been sort of visible behind-the-scenes support to help pull this off. So too is Brookings Institution. You'll hear from Bruce Katz later. I'd like to say thanks to them. To John Manicherry, kind of a collaborator and sort of a fellow voyager in this reimagining of place from Sweden, whom you'll hear about in the next session. As well as, of course, the Heinz Endowments, as well as our colleagues in many of the other foundations that have been really supportive of this effort. But most of all to you. We've heard that the enthusiasm to attend has been just off the charts. We're at capacity. We had to move the venue from Google to here. But I would also like to say thank you, EIC, and thank you, Google, who'll be hosting the dinner tonight. This couldn't have been a better location for us to have a conversation about it, reimagining some of our options for the future. I think this conversation happens all the time in Pittsburgh, actually. I mean, I'm looking at you, Don. We know it happens all the time. And it's due not just because, but because many of you are committed to having and driving these agendas. What's special about this conference, besides maybe the scale and the international aspect, is the timing. We are right now at a moment in Pittsburgh's history where there's a lot of groundbreaking, a lot of bricks and mortars, bricks and mortar projects that are beginning and are about to be committed to. And this, to my mind, is a time when we should say, wait a second, here we are in the 21st century with a lot of change going on. What is our model? How are we preparing ourselves for things that can be very disruptive to standard ways of thinking about how we live? Whether it's transportation or energy or information infrastructure. How do we think about fundamental issues of equity and access? I mean, it is also interesting that we're looking above this remarkable 1960s sort of Corbusier scar that bifurcates a hill district. Let it be a reminder of, to keep us humble while we also are exploring about this question of what can we do to have a profound impact in a positive sense. So all I can say is I'm terribly excited to hear from you and to have sidebar conversations in the hall when we have amazing juices. Thank you for whoever did that, by the way. And with that note, I'll just say thanks for being here. I'd like to introduce now John Manicherry, whom I mentioned earlier. He'll be the MC for the Planet section. And let's have a great time. Cheers.
So I've often wondered in my wildest dreams what it would look like if a city was about to do something fantastic. It was about to take a giant bite out of its future and reinvent itself for sustainability. And I think we now know. It looks a bit like this. So to inaugurate the event and to inaugurate this project and to inaugurate the project hashtag, I'm going to take a video of you guys saying hello to the world. And what I want you to do is to say a greeting to the world that coders use, and that is going to mark the transition of this city from a city built on steel to a city built on code. So after 3, we're going to try it a few times. You're going to say, hello world, and you're going to raise your hands. If you don't do it well, we're going to do it again, all right? And we're going to tweet it out live. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, I was just doing it for fake. I thought you'd never do it that well. Okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3. Wow, you guys are good. This is going to be fun. Okay, so that's gone. Conference hashtag is P4PGH. Now, I would love to start this event with fun, with excitement, to capture the mood that we're now part of. But I'm afraid I have to start with some very bad news. There's a species that's dying. This is the Planet session, and we have to confront the facts. It's a species that's been tremendously useful to the world. It's a very beautiful species. Their cry is very plaintive, but it's dying out. Its time on this planet is probably finished. That species is the environmentalist. Now, it's not just radical environmentalists whose time is up. It's all kinds of environmentalists: business, policy, science, design. All of these people, all of these kinds of jobs and voices are dying out. Why are they dying out? Not because they're wrong. They're dying out because they're right. They're dying out because there is enough consensus to move on from the story of problems. Think of it like this. If someone dials 911, they're raising the alarm. Does that person have the answer to solving the problem? No, not necessarily. And so what we're now looking for is, what's next? What comes after environmentalism? Who's going to answer the 911 call? What happens next after environmentalism? And this Planet session is trying to get to grips with that. What we're really looking at is a bunch of people that are struggling with this challenge. How do you take limits to resource availability and make value out of that? These are the first responders. And so what we're going to do is to look today to a bunch of speakers who basically are reporting from the front lines of the sustainability transition beyond environmentalism. Their job is to create value whilst respecting resource limits and trying to find a way to include everybody in the distribution of those, in the value created from that resource base. And so that's the game today. Value from a limited resource base. That's the Planet session I want to share with you. We're not going to listen in on 911 calls talking about the destruction of the environment. These are the first responders, and this is a report from the front lines. So I'd like to invite to the stage Maria Ranke, the first speaker of the first P4 conference, and the spearhead of the Nordic delegation. Maria, you're very welcome to the stage.
Hi everyone. What a great day and what a cool venue. This is so Pittsburgh. Steelworker by day, exotic dancer by night, with big dreams to become a ballet dancer. Alex Owens from the blockbuster Flashdance. I guess I'm not unique, but it was through the eyes of Alex Owens I first was presented to this great city. I was 8 years old when it came out, and it has followed me ever since. Not because of the plot, I must say, but because of the streets of Pittsburgh, the ambience, the roughness, the dynamic feel of the city. I know, this is cheesy, especially for you ginsers. Anyway, I really like Pittsburgh. 10 years ago, I had the privilege to come here for the first time, and of course, I couldn't miss the Andy Warhol Museum, Carnegie Mellon University, wow. Now being back as the CEO of the Stockholm Chamber of Commerce, one of the oldest and leading business organizations in Sweden. Meeting all of you, it's an honor. I'm intrigued by the journey that Pittsburgh has been on since my last visit, and I'm even more curious about where you're headed in the years to come. But before we talk more about that, before we talk more about you, I want to talk about me. Stockholm is one of the greatest cities on earth. Okay, I know that every one of you is thinking, everybody says that about their hometown. Well, maybe, but in this case, it really is. Green, clean, and cool. That's Stockholm. Modern, but with a history that goes back to the 13th century or even beyond, to the era of the Vikings. Urban, but hop on one of the many boats at one of the waterfronts in Stockholm, and the archipelago is just minutes away. We're about 1 million people in the city and 2.2 in the county, and we are growing. Stockholm is the fastest growing capital in the European Union at the time. What is key to this success? Talented people flourish in Stockholm. Headquarters of multinationals flourish in Stockholm. Startups flourish in Stockholm. Not just Spotify, but also the companies behind Minecraft and Candy Crush Saga, just to mention a few. When I flew in from Newark yesterday, I could see two people from where I was seated, and these two people were playing Candy Crush Saga. Stockholm is home to the second strongest IT cluster per capita in the world after Silicon Valley. And if you ask me, that is nothing less than sensational. A dense urban environment drives innovation. And that's true for Pittsburgh and for Stockholm and for all other places in the world. A dense city combines and connects labor and capital, and not the least, ideas. And Stockholm has become a factory of ideas. As you all know, when people meet, like we do here today, things happen. And when people interact, even more things happen. And things have happened for sure in Stockholm. The Chamber of Commerce has been a front runner. And I dare to say that we are not like most other chambers. We don't focus primarily on taxes. Taxes don't build success. People do. Let me give you a few examples of ideas that we have had and been able to realize together with others. First, the Stockholm subway. I love the subway. It's a universe of its own down there. And the subway system allows large amount of people to travel in a very efficient way without disturbing any other traffic systems. No wonder it's the most popular means of transportation in Stockholm. Every weekday, 4 Pittsburghs travel in the subway system. And it was established back in the 50s, and for many years it expanded alongside our growing population. But then expansion stopped, but the population kept growing. And today we're 1/3 more than we were in 1985, but we're relying on the same subway system. To me, that's beyond comprehension. So my organization has done quite its share of campaigning and lobbying over the years, and in 2013 we had a breakthrough, and the politicians struck a deal to expand the subway system with 9 new subway stations, and with that comes massive opportunities for new housing, which we badly need. As I said, Stockholm is one of the fastest growing cities in Europe. And you can't grow on an empty stomach, which brings me to my second example, the food truck invasion. Every city with self-respect needs and has great street food. And here in the US, of course, you clearly understood this way back. But in Stockholm, it was not until recently that we discovered the wonders of the taco truck. High-quality street food was not a common sight in Stockholm until just a few years ago. At the Stockholm Chamber of Commerce, we partnered with a small street food network and introduced our local government to the concept of food truck and also the need for appropriate permits. A simple idea. Simple, yet it led to more businesses, which means more jobs and also more good food. Starting a street food business it's easier than starting a cafe or a restaurant, so it lowers the thresholds for entering the market as an entrepreneur. And up until now, in only a few years, the food truck invasion has led to 800 new jobs in Stockholm. On to another burning issue, culture. more museums and more private museums. It's as easy as this. Great cities need great culture to attract great people. Take the Underworld Museum here, for instance. It's a good example of making Pittsburgh more interesting and more culturally rewarding. And there are many more examples in this one of the cultural capitals in the US. During the last decade, we have witnessed the establishment of 8 new private museums in Stockholm, like ABBA, the museum, the Photographic Museum, and the wonderful modern art gallery, Artipelag, an amazing art hall out in the archipelago. It was created by the man who invented Baby Bjorn, you know, the baby carrier. And those are just a few examples. What I want to say is that Stockholm has become a startup hub also for culture and creative businesses. Moving on to my last example, where the Chamber of Commerce has been a driving force in recent development. This one is about embracing the digital revolution, a revolution that is spinning faster and faster. Do you know what the single most common profession in Stockholm is these days? Computer programmer. If Latin was the universal language you simply had to master in ancient Europe, and English the language of the first wave of globalization, what is the universal language of today's global modern economy? Programming. In February, I presented, together with the mayor of Stockholm and one of the 2 founders of Spotify, a project on programming in schools. This fall, children in Stockholm schools will start learning the most universal language in the world. They will have programming on their school curriculum. So what can Pittsburgh learn from us? What does Pittsburgh have to build on? Well, there is no stronger foundation than steel, right? About a month ago, I visited South by Southwest Interactive Festival in Austin, Texas, and I had the opportunity to listen to AOL co-founder Steve Case. He visited this town last summer, and you seem to have made quite an impression on him because he was so excited when he talked about Pittsburgh. He made references to your long history and compared Pittsburgh to Silicon Valley. He said that Pittsburgh powered the Industrial Revolution. It was Silicon Valley of its time. And of course, he complimented Carnegie Mellon, who wouldn't. The interesting thing with Pittsburgh these days seems to be that you're really up and coming, promising, full of life, full of hope and ambitions. But you're also quite too humble, not really making a big fuss about what's going on. We will talk a lot about sustainability these days. Our Stockholm experience has taught us that to achieve true sustainability, we have to see it as not only an environmental issue. In the future, there simply will be no place for growth unless it's sustainable and inclusive. Economic, social, environmental needs must be simultaneously addressed. The burning question now is, how do we plan and act and go ahead? For me, better conditions for entrepreneurship and innovation are key in achieving sustainability. I'm happy to see that you are onto this here in Pittsburgh. To conclude, ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to share some of our experiences with you, what we have achieved so far as inspiration, so that you can continue to build on all the things you already have to make Pittsburgh an even more fantastic place. So here goes Mayor Peduto, from Stockholm with love, 3 concrete pieces of advice. My first point, brag. Lift your heads high. Let the rest of the US, let the rest of the world, let the rest of us, let us know about your journey, what you come from, where you come from, what you have become, and where you want to be in the future. Brag about your entrepreneurs, your experiences, your knowledge. Brag about the steps you have taken and are about to take to truly compete in a sustainable way with other great cities. Second, establish more creative clusters. Make sure that you do all you can do to make it easier for entrepreneurs to take the next steps and make their ideas come true here. And third, and this is really important, embrace urbanization. For Pittsburgh to continue to develop in a sustainable and inclusive way and to become truly sustainable, a city that welcomes people and business, urbanization is absolutely key. I'm talking about smart urbanization, taking advantage of new technology in order to build a dense and dynamic city. New infrastructure, including public transit, that makes it easy to commute. Residential areas that are connected so that people can easily interact with one another, where they can exchange ideas, break social patterns, and meet people with other ways of living. We have to embrace all of this. Act and plan ahead. It's the only way for Pittsburgh, Stockholm, and all other great places to reach our full potential. Thank you.
So Maria, why are you so excited about Pittsburgh? I saw your speech before, and I was amazed that you had so much insight already, and you were so keen to get out here and get going. How did you get to know of the story? What's the deal? Have you always been interested in the Steel City, now the Code City? What's the...
You know, look at this room. Look out of the window. I think, you know, as a person who loves cities, it's a passion of mine. It's really a city. It is urban. And what struck me yesterday night when I was talking to someone at the reception, I asked about how many people actually live downtown in this cool downtown area, and it was like almost nobody. 4,500 people or so.
Yeah.
That's nothing. And actually, you know, if you want to become sustainable, then you have to move closer together.
Do you think that the Stockholm business community can find a way to kind of join in the conversation here? And conversely, do you think there's a way for whichever industry and cultural actors to come out and be active in Sweden? Because it's a pretty closed shop in Sweden, as I have learned.
Yeah, I guess the simple answer is yes, of course.
Right.
You know, if we create the human connections, then, as I said, things will happen. So
right.
I guess this is the beginning of hopefully a beautiful friendship.
So Maria is signing up to bring the Swedish business community here. Thanks, Maria.
Thanks.
Okay. So we now are going to hear from Hal Harvey, who's one of America's foremost energy interpreters. He's been in the energy trade for his entire career and basically has been at the vanguard of communicating and advising the transition to sustainable energy futures. He now runs Energy Innovation, which is a policy and advisory platform for energy transition. Hal, come and join us, please.
Hi, John. Thank you. Greetings. I'm especially honored to be here in as much as you named this building after my little company, Energy Innovation. So, what I want to do is pick up the gauntlet that Mayor Peduto tossed down yesterday. He asked the following question: if you assembled a city with the vast resources that Pittsburgh had and put behind it political commitment and the academic resources we have here and the amazing philanthropy and the vibrant private sector, what could you deliver? So I'm going to offer 4 challenges for Pittsburgh. Before I say that, before I get into it, I want to say I grew up in the Silicon Valley, or I went to college at Stanford, and I've worked with venture capital groups, technologists ever since. And I have seen the power of innovation in an innovation ecosystem. Dramatic things can happen. Innovation is an inexhaustible resource, but it requires a focus and an intention in order to prosper. It requires the participation of all those actors in society. And I think Pittsburgh's ideally positioned to do that, not just for Pittsburgh, but for the world. So let me jump into it. Just a couple words of context. This will be no surprise to anyone in the world, but it's time for us to move, it's time for us to kick the fossil fuel habit. This is the tar sands in Canada. I've flown all over them. Thousands and thousands of acres. An area the size of Florida is now zoned for this kind of destruction. And here's the alternative. These things run forever. They don't emit anything. These are solar panels. 5 years ago, I could not have stood here and tell you that a fossil-free future is feasible. But look what's happened just in those 5 years. We've seen this incredible rise of new clean technologies, and with them, an incredible price drop. Solar has grown tenfold in the last 4 years. The price has dropped 80% for solar PV panels. Wind in the last 8 years has dropped almost 60%. Light-emitting diodes, these super great lights, have dropped way more than 80% in price. And the upshot is that a fossil-free future costs the same as a fossil-intensive future. This is what I could not have said 5 years ago. There's a fantastic new study out called The New Climate Economy that goes through this in some detail. So if it costs the same to build this fossil-free future, it should happen, but it won't happen without the kind of innovation we need and without the kind of political intensity to drive the adoption of these innovations we need. This slide here compares the total costs, capital costs and operating costs of clean technologies above the line and conventional technologies below the line. And the point is, several of them have crossed the line. It is now cheaper in about half the world to install zero carbon technologies than carbonaceous technologies. That's an amazing inflection point. That's the change that we need. So what does that mean for Pittsburgh, and what are the challenges that we have for us? The first thing that has to be recognized is that the human future is an urban future. Just about 4 years ago was the first time in human history when more than half the people lived in cities. Essentially, all the new population growth in the world is landing in the cities. And the cities drive economic output. Not surprisingly, as this slide shows, that's also where where energy is consumed and where therefore carbon is emitted, either directly or by induced demand. So we win in the cities or we lose in the cities. In the industrialized West, that means reinventing the cities. In China, it means getting them right in the first place. Plus, there's a fair amount of reinvention that's required. It doesn't mean that cities become self-sufficient or that there's enough solar panels and gardens in the neighborhood to run the place. There's a symbiosis between the rest of the country and the cities. But the decisions we make here and the political force we apply here, and emphatically the innovation that we develop and promulgate from here, is going to be what drives it. So I'm going to offer 4 challenges for your consideration. By the way, this is not a picture of Pittsburgh. This is Tianjin, which is a little city of 12 million people near Beijing. And they're determined to be the most environmentally friendly city on the planet. I think Pittsburgh better beat them. So these are the 4 challenges I put for your consideration. Go to zero energy in buildings, phase out fossil fuels, learn to be the leaders in optimizing systems, which I'll get into in a minute, and rethink urban patterns. I put these up here because these are the mega trends that we need in order to land at a reasonable carbon future, because they require a lot of innovation, and because Pittsburgh is incredibly suited to do each of these things. If Pittsburgh consciously built an innovation culture around any one of these goals, it would own it, the same way the Silicon Valley owns software or Research Triangle Park owns medical technologies. It could be incredibly prominent economic engine for the city and a prominent gift to the world. Let me start with the first one, net zero energy buildings. Buildings are old technologies, and they're essentially dumb technologies. There are no economic actors organized to optimize buildings. They don't exist. Architects can't do it, developers can't do it, the people that make glass don't make insulation, those people don't make structural elements, those people don't make HVAC. It's a fragmented industry, and it's walking away from amazing potential. We now have the technology to make all residences and most commercial buildings near net zero energy. It's an official goal of the state of California that all new residences become net zero energy by 2020 and commercial by 2030. That's a pretty big deal. But who's going to drive that innovation? There's a lot to it. I've listed some building envelope technologies. Windows have these low emissivity coating that you can tune to the orientation and tune to the climate. And a good window is as good an insulation as a good wall, or a net solar heater if you're in a cold country, or a net cooler if you're in hot country. You can have building integrated photovoltaics. There's a whole suite of technologies that have been essentially ignored. I know at Carnegie Mellon University, I think, has the best building sciences program in the country. It's a fantastic opportunity. Volker Hartkopf there. Yes, indeed. Brilliant man. It's not just what you do with the envelope, of course. It's also the possibility of rethinking the energy mix that supplies the building and that moves it around. And there are fantastic opportunities there. And then there's this whole new thing that's happening. That little thermostat there's a Nest thermostat. Who's got one of those? So you put this $250 gizmo on your wall, and your building energy goes down 15%, just like that. And all it is a switch and a radio and a little bit of cuteness, right? So if you can reduce the energy consumption in a building by 15% by putting that on the wall and letting it do its homework and letting it talk to the cloud and letting it learn about the weather and letting it learn about your building all by itself, there's something going on. But where is the center for innovation on optimizing buildings globally? Here, if anywhere. Buildings is an enormous industry, and there is nobody organized to drive that as a new thing. From a policy perspective, it means that the city of Pittsburgh should drive towards net zero energy buildings. The best building code in the world, as far as I know, is California's, for this simple reason. It automatically gets tighter every 3 years. It was signed into law when Jerry Brown was the youngest governor of California. It has not been changed since. He's now the oldest governor in California's history. And our buildings use 80% less energy, new ones, compared to pre-code buildings, right? So this is a winnable deal. All right, next challenge. Phase out fossil fuels. This is where I began. Because of the incredible advances in technology on the energy consuming side to make the world more efficient, and on the energy supply side to live without carbon, we have the opportunity now to phase out fossil fuels. But I'm telling you, it's not just a matter of building PV panels and windmills. It requires one to rethink the grid altogether, the electric utility grid. Why? This is a picture. That top green line there is California's load on a typical January day in 2020. And you can see the load goes up and down, depending on when people wake up and they turn on their toasters and they go to work and they come home and they watch TV and they do all that stuff. The line under it, this is called the duck curve because it's supposed to look like a duck, is what happens to California's load after you put the solar in. And what happens to it is it plummets from about, the net load plummets from about 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock when the sun comes up, or 9:30. And then at about 4 o'clock till 7 p.m., it skyrockets again. And to give you a sense of scale, that skyrocketing of 13,500 megawatts, that's 13 and a half huge nuclear plants equivalent that have to be turned on and run for 2 hours and turned off again. And fossil power plants hate thermal cycling. They hate to be turned on and turned off. So you need to solve this variability problem with renewables, or you run into a wall. And the wall happens somewhere between 25 and 40% of renewables. So we're now in a position where we can win this one. We can drive towards a zero carbon grid much more quickly, much more cheaply than anybody will acknowledge, almost anybody, but not unless we solve this problem. So who's organized to solve this problem? And how do we solve this problem? Quickly, because I have 4 minutes and 59 seconds left. The first thing people instinctively come to is storage. You create energy in the day and you use it at night, therefore you need a battery. And storage is great, But we're not going to have anywhere near enough storage to solve this problem. And the good news is you don't need storage. I've got infrastructure up there. If you have good transmission lines and you use them intelligently, the whole problem smooths out dramatically. Seattle and San Diego never have the same power supply or power demand. So hook them together and let them help each other a little bit. The second one is demand response. I like to say we have 100 million large-scale batteries already in America that we're not using. They're called buildings. And they're thermal batteries, not electrical batteries. But you put in those smart thermostats, you can pre-cool your buildings on a hot day. You can adjust the temperature within a couple degrees so people don't notice, and you totally balance out the variability of sunshine and wind. So who's in charge of that? Who's doing that? What utility is properly organized to capture the demand side of the equation and match it, hook it up with the supply side of the equation? It's a huge economic opportunity. It's fantastic. It requires switches, radios, data, and intelligence. Those are cheap. Those are high value. Those are things Pittsburgh's equipped to deliver to the world. There's a few more things you have to do. You use natural gas to ramp up and ramp down quickly. Use it for power, not for energy. That drastically reduces the CO2 emissions and the environmental impacts, but helps balance your system. And it's cheap. Those turbines are there, the pipes are there. Just use them differently. So this is how you phase out fossil fuels. What does it mean politically? It means that the big purchasers of energy here need to sit down with their utilities and say, let's work through a transition together. And it means the state of Pittsburgh, sorry, close, the state of Pennsylvania, I know you guys are not a state yet, just a city. The state of Pennsylvania needs to demand ever larger, continuously increasing fractions of renewable energy from the power companies. And the political power to do that rests here and rests in that other city on the eastern side of the state. Okay, challenge 3, system optimization. 2 boring words, 1 exciting concept. The inventors in America are incredibly good at device optimization. Incredible engines, pumps, light bulbs, windows, but we have very few people in charge of system optimization. And I talked about buildings as a system. No one's in charge of optimizing it. Talk about the utility as a system, considering the demand side and the supply side, considering all these new information and control technologies we have. Who's in charge of optimizing that? Nobody. We now have the technologies through sensors, through control systems, through communication systems, through big data to optimize systems. And it is the dramatic frontier, I'm telling you, dramatic frontier in energy efficiency and in using resources more efficiently. So system optimization is a new thing. And again, here's Volker's building here. It requires a new kind of thinking, a new kind of discipline, pulled together in a problem-solving orientation. Okay, my last one. And this will be familiar to many people here. It's rethinking urbanization. The old modalities of spread out suburbs don't work in a creative, purpose-driven world. The millennials are moving out of the suburbs into the cities. People are driving less, not more, for the first time in history. And what people want is not mobility. They want access. And you can get access by going somewhere, but you can also get access by rethinking what your city textures is like. Make it mixed use. And there are zoning opportunities, there are transportation opportunities, there are ways to create these creative clusters that give people that meet human needs much more fully than isolated suburban houses. And that's part of revitalizing a city. We have to reinvent America to do that. So this is my challenge, these 4 challenges. I think I've got them summarized here. I did not summarize them. But these 4 challenges for Pittsburgh, these are realms that are accelerating. They are realms that offer incredible potential for cleaning up the world. They will take advantage of your vibrant private sector, your incredible academic resources, the philanthropic backup, and the political commitment that exists here. But they need that purpose, they need that drive to become that ecosystem for you. So, thank you.
Realistically, how good are these guys? I mean, where are they at in the transition map?
The Pittsburghians?
Yeah. There may be some issues we want to avoid on this stage, but in general, on the positive side of the energy transition, how far are they advanced down the road?
On several topics, emphatically with buildings, I would say, and rethinking and rebuilding an industrial city, farther ahead than almost anyone, but not near enough to lead the world the way it needs to go. These frontiers are much bigger than most people realize.
Do you think it's going to be the public sector or the private sector or some other non-governmental actors that are going to trigger the big shift right now?
There's an alchemy that happens.
Right.
And if you look at innovation ecosystems like Research Triangle Park or Silicon Valley, it requires this joint force. And I don't mean that in a soft way. You need policy that demands change.
Right.
You need policy that reshapes the urban form by changing zoning. But as soon as you do that, you also need to you need to have the academic and the private sector focus behind it.
The correct answer, I think. Okay, thanks, Hal.
Great, thanks very much.
Brilliant, thank you so much. I'd like to present now another guest from Sweden. He tried very hard to get away. He's one of the busiest architects and planners in Sweden. Arguably, he's a rock star of planning in the Nordic region. He's the head of planning at Malmö City, which is known around the world. Bill visited last year for having really gone to town, pun not really intended, on sustainability. And done it from a planning perspective rather than a piecemeal approach with specific projects. Krista, as a result of that, become the National Architecture Advisor. He's writing the National Strategy for Architectural Planning in Sweden right now. I had to beg him twice to come. Please welcome Krista Larsson from Malmö.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for the introduction. I will say I'm very pleased to be invited here to Pittsburgh. An architect, planning director from a small country far away, and to be sure that you really know where Malmö is located, I will say that it's somewhere quite far away in Scandinavia. It is, how do I get the pointer here? No pointer, okay. You can see the red dot, hopefully. That is Malmö. Malmö is located in a cross-border situation close to Denmark, and that is very much what it is concerning, how interesting this is to be in a cross-border position. I read through some of your documents here in Pittsburgh, and I will say that I'm really impressed of what you are going into. It seems to me that the process that you are arranging now is really, really interesting. And yeah, good luck with that, I will say. You will need it, and we have worked with quite the same thing for many years now. And I will share some knowledge with you, how we have worked in Malmö and what we are doing now. So for us, and the same in Pittsburgh, I think, the crisis. In the beginning of 1990s, we lost 28,000 job places. The shipyard went down, the textile industry moved to Portugal, and the mechanical industry totally failed. So that was really a crisis. Due to the cross-border situation, we saw some possibilities. We created the new region. We invested, or we, the national level, invested a lot in infrastructure. We got the new bridge, and today, between Malmö and Copenhagen, 100,000 people are commuting every week. So that is a very strong force. It is driving us economically very, very strong. To measure the crisis, you can see there's one building crane on the picture here. That crane stood in Copenhagen and was used for bungee jump. So that was really, really difficult recession. Today, we can look forward to next step in the region, and that would be the tunnel between Denmark and Germany. And that means that Malmö is 330,000 inhabitants, approximately. Scania region, 1.2. Öresund region, 3.8 million. And when we have the new link to northern Germany, we will be 8 to 10 million people along this railway. So the most interesting examples that we can show from Malmö is the Western Harbour. We formed a vision for the city, and we have 3 key projects. One was the Housing Expo, and you can see the turning torso, which is the new symbol for the city. The old symbol, the building crane from the shipyard, is now torn down and exported to Korea. And this district is the first climate-neutral city district in Sweden. 100% renewable energy sources, locally produced. We are using the aquifer and the limestones, windmills, and so on. So that was one key project. The other one was the university. And the third one was a strategy for the public spaces. So this was visionary-led and it was politically led. And I mean this is very important, to have a strong mayor. You have that in Pittsburgh and we have that in Malmö, Ilmar Reepalu. He was an architect as well, and sometimes I think that was very good for me. So this political leadership is very, very important. And we established a planning philosophy. And I would say that we cooperated a lot, and also we have experimented and experimented. Most of the time it went well, but not always. But we did it, and I think that's very important. And the politicians, they need to trust all the departments and give them a lot of trust to do things. Visions is important. We are still delivering visions, and I think it's important that the city shows that they have visions for the city. The market like that. Sustainability, that's the key question for us. That was the mindset. The whole process that we arranged is around sustainability. But sustainability changed. In the beginning, it was mostly stormwater management, green space factors, and so on. Then we now stick to the Brundtland Commission. We are using the financial, the social, and environmental aspects. The picture shows ecological, but I think you should say environment, because that's a broader perspective, and that suits better. So we are always using these three at the same time. Sometimes you can say that the environment is the fundament or the base, the economy is the tool, and the social sustainability is the goal. There's something in that discussion, I mean. So we have also made a commission, so we are more focused on social sustainability today, and also in a value-based driven planning system. We always thinking of what values or what qualities should a project add to the city fabric as a whole, and that is really important. The new master plan is cultural and democratic arena, of course, and as you see those dots here, I would say this is the old way of planning. Everything is in its own place. This is where we are today, but we have to go into that, what I'm calling the spaghetti city, where everything is very much connected to each other. The mixed and green and dense city, that is really important. So the new comprehensive plan is a densification plan. We shall work with a city that already exists, which also means that social sustainability it is easier to work with. So we shall densify with what really is missing in the different districts in the city. We will also work with infrastructure, establish a new tramway system, establish a new infrastructure ring around the city, and use infrastructure to create planning, to develop the city as a whole, to connect the different parts of the city, so the city will be a city for all. The Commission for Social Sustainable Malmö is, we are influenced by Sir Michael Marmot. He did that on a global level. We have done it on the local levels, the city of Malmö. And the differences in health is really interesting to look at. And for example, life expectancy in Malmö differs 7 to 8 years, 7-8 years between eastern and western Malmö. It differs 50 years on a global level. I don't know how it is in Pittsburgh, but that's not fair. And how could we, with spatial planning, correct that so the city would be more fair and equal? And I consider I was a part of that commission, and I'm so convinced that the planning questions is one of the key questions to create a social, sustainable city as a whole. The third document that we are working with is the climate strategy. And this climate strategy says that with 2030 should be carbon neutral. That's not easy, I would say that. We are consuming too much energy. The cars are consuming too much energy, and so on. We are moving around in the city in stupid ways sometimes. 50% of all car rides in Malmö are shorter than 3 kilometers. I think it's the same in Pittsburgh. We shall use biking and we shall walk, and that's also cost effectively for the city. People get healthier if they walk and bike. So we are now reorganizing the city for the 4th time, I would say. And that reorganization is to link the city together as a whole, to bridging barriers. This is an example in a large-scale area where we are going to transform the large roads to city-like streets and building houses and mixed use along this street. And at the same time, empower the people, get the people to be a part in the process. Some Nordic perspectives in that. The Economist has written about the next supermodel. Probably you have heard about that. I don't really know what they are meaning of, but there's something in it. And we are investigating that in the Nordic City Network. You can go into the website and see everything what I'm talking about now. I'm the chairman there, and I mean, the modernistic way of planning a city, that's more or less a functional city, but you had to add new layers and new dimensions on that. One layer is the attractivity, another layer is the innovation, and the 3rd or 4th layer, if you say so, is the cultural layer. Culture, the glue between people, not only the cultural institutions. I would say that the glue between people is much more important than the cultural institutions. We have investigated 450 different projects in our countries, and we have seen 8 different theses or trends. The cities in the northern are quite small. They have to be clustered in regions so they could compete. We are quite innovative in business strategies. We are taking well care of the public spaces. And there are some tricky things about these public spaces, and that is that they should be public. You shouldn't privatize the public spaces. That's dangerous if you are talking about connectivity and social sustainability. The welfare institutions, and also use the welfare institutions when you are building the buildings, using the buildings, put them into the right place, so you are supporting the development of the city as a whole. And that's something that you could regulate from the municipality itself. Culture as the glue, as I said. Infrastructure, using infrastructure not only for transportation, also use it to get connectivity and social sustainability. The knowledge of the people, use it, and also the green, the parks and the ecosystems into the cities. I will give you some examples. When I'm working now with the National Policy for Architecture, I came back to this, the citizens as the asset, the knowledge that the people really have. That is something to take care of in a process like the process you should go into now, and we are into in Malmö. The line is one project that we are doing with the enterprises around this line. There's 6,000 people working. They don't meet each other so much. So the purpose of this project is to get people meeting each other every day so they could create some new innovations. And that was not possible in the old way of working, but it is possible in the new way of working. And we have something that we call the 4th urban space, and that is how the public spaces is collaborate or supporting the 1st floor or the ground floor in the buildings, how the interaction is there. And I would say that we are also strengthening this process when we are investing in a new concert hall in Malmö. So when the municipality like to do something, they can show the way, and if the municipality is investing, the market follows after. So now in this area, we have 200,000 square meters that being built, thanks to the investments from the city. The next example is in a large-scale area. Some young girls came to us and said, we have no place to be. The boys are everywhere. And this is another part of Malmö. Malmö is a dense, small city, but the mental distances between the western and the eastern part is very, very long. So we started a project, and the background to this is that when we are linking the city together, we are trying to find spaces and green parks and so on to connect the city and make it interesting to walk. And so we started this project with the girls, and we saw who uses the public spaces, the boys with skateboards and footballs, and the girls, they have to do something else. So we started to facilitate the process. We took the ideas, we didn't do specific ourselves something, we didn't add something to this, we just facilitated the project, the process. And the result is something really fantastic. Some new place, we couldn't invent it ourselves, but it is focused on culture and dance instead of sports. Really, really interesting, I would say that. Listen to young people, listen to the people. This is how we now discussing young people's living. 71,000 young people has been involved in this process, thanks to the web. Policies and other things. I would say I think I have a wonderful job because it's so complex and it is so interesting. And I think you think so as well here in Pittsburgh. And I would say all the best to you. And we need some new ideas. We need some new instruments. We have to have processes that are holistic. We have to create consensus with the people, with the market. We have to use spatial organizations in a good way. And that means that we need policies. And I said before that I'm working with the national policy now, and this is how I feel when I'm working with that. It's really demanding. So I will say thank you very much, and that was everything from the priest today.
You stand there. What would you say in a country where planning has to some extent been overtaken by other forces in society? Because in Sweden, your job is, I don't want to say it's easier, but it's in a way more effective because of the traditional effective, the power structure of planners that has been shown to be effective. How would you advise Pittsburgh and other American cities to use planning when it's not necessarily so embedded in the power system as what you have access to?
Well, I think that's a tricky question. The main advice is that you have to share a vision. You have to know the conditions, and you have to know what should you meet with your planning and with your vision. And you have to have consensus about that, both with the people in the city. So that process is extremely important, because I'm quite convinced that the people will not accept anything that they really aren't a part of. So that's one thing. And of course, all stakeholders, the market, the real estate companies and so on. But stick to the vision and be honest with that.
Would you say, I think you will, but help us understand why you might say sustainability is good for society and good for urban planning in general, rather than a block on development? How do you interpret that boundary?
Yeah, I mean, sustainability, you can't say anything else. That is the crucial question. I mean, we should survive on this planet. I think we should. And that's why we have to really be agreed about sustainability.
But you think can sustainability be a kind of incentive to quality of life? Absolutely. Or is it somehow a block on human development, would you say?
Sure it is. And when I'm discussing with young people, they are very, very much more into the sustainability aspect. Right. They will not accept anything else in the future.
Do you think you're going to want to stay involved in this process as we go forward?
Absolutely.
Brilliant.
Absolutely.
Okay, see you next time. Thanks, Krista.
Yeah.
So now we have a special session. Grant Oliphant, the president of the Heinz Endowments, will be in conversation with Jesper Nygård, the CEO of a fascinating foundation in Copenhagen called Realdania. He'll explain it himself. But they've been very involved on the Danish side of the Øresund region, of the region that Krista was describing. Grant will be questioning and exploring with Jesper how they make a difference. And what's fascinating is to see how two foundations with broadly the same scale of endowment, which is not small, can leverage change. Krista, Jesper and Grant, please come to the stage. Hi. Here's your ticket. Good back here.
Morning, everybody. So, I came into my role about 10 months ago and spoke with Andre Heinz and his mom and his brothers. It was pretty clear to me that one of the priorities that I would want to pursue coming into the foundation would be to look at this notion of urban centers as drivers of sustainability and innovation, and that was going to be a really important priority, not just for the Heinz Endowments in the coming years, but for Pittsburgh. So I asked Bruce Katz at Brookings and John Manuchehri to basically blow up for me everything I thought I knew about those subjects. And one of the people they introduced me to is our guest that I'll be speaking with, who is Jesper Nygård, who does something very similar to what a number of us foundation leaders in the room do, but he does it from the unique perspective of where he is and the international arena in which he plays. So Jesper, first of all, welcome. Thank you for being here. Would you tell us a little bit about Realdania?
Yes, and thank you, and thank you for having me here. It's a great honor for me to be here in this wonderful city, and very interesting to hear about your perspective and your very, very interesting and very ambitious work. I'm coming from a foundation in the Nordic countries, and here you can see a little map of United States, and if you go far east to a place where two of the other colleagues and states have been from, Sweden, I'm from the neighbor country, Denmark. And we have a lot of cooperation in the Nordic country. We fight when it's about soccer, but when it's about livability and trying to create good societies, we try to work together. But when I'm talking about the perspective from my organization, Realdania, you have to understand the context. We are a very small country. We are 5 million Danes, 1/3 of Greater New York, 1/4 of the state of Pennsylvania, the double amount of the metropolitan area of Pittsburgh. That's the whole country of Denmark. So we are a tiny place in the world. It's another way of system. We have a very high tax. We have a welfare system, not welfare being grants to the individual, but we have a safety net in our society. I've been working with that a long time, since the Second World War. And then, as the most important thing here, we speak Danish, so I hope you can understand my English for today. I'm going to try to tell you a little bit about how we are funded and how we are created. We are a Danish foundation, and we are not really a foundation. I'll get back to that in a minute. We used to own a mortgage institute for 200-300 years. We sold it in year 2000, and when we did that, we had this board, nice men and one woman who was standing there, used to earning money to keep the pocket, to keep the wallet in the pocket, and now they had to take the wallet out and use the money, which is a very, very big shift of running a business. So we have been in this business for 15 years, trying to donate money. Since we are not a foundation, we have a history back to the fire of Copenhagen in 1795. Danes are very organized in associations. All Danes are members of a lot of associations. Our agricultural system, our non-profit housing sector system, and our mortgage system is based on people being members. And we came from this system, so we continued. We're not today a foundation. We are a member-based association with 150,000 members in Denmark, and our purpose with that is we're similar to a foundation, we're similar to a fund, but we are a member-based philanthropic organization. And the way we work is our money comes from the built environment, and our money has to go back to the built environment. So we have spent these 15 years very much inspired by American foundations, trying to be talented in bringing people together to create solutions on a lot of the topics this conference is about. Our aim is to improve the quality of life for the Danes through the built environment. We were founded in the year 2000. We had $2 billion US. Today we have 4 billion, and we have delivered 4 billion to society on all kinds of issues. So our aim is to work together. We have been focusing. Now we work in 5 programs, a lot of things about sustainability, a lot about cities, a lot about the rural areas, a lot about how we create quality for people. But our way of doing it is very much trying to inspire people to work together. Our main thesis is things you can't do alone, maybe you can solve them if you do it together. We use, and that's very important for me to say, this is a Swedish sentence. I think you know Pippi Longstocking, even over here on the other side of the Atlantic. It's a Swedish children's book, and Pippi is a very strong, very powerful girl who can lift a horse, and she says, when you are very strong, you have to be very nice. And that's our philosophy. We have a lot of money, we intervene in a lot of processes, and we have to do that in a very talented and a very leveraged way in order to try to create solutions.
That's terrific. I have to interject a question, or people are going to wonder what I'm doing up here. Yeah. When I listen to you, I wonder too. So, thank you. So you were very nice when we met, talking about how you took the model for these programs from what you saw in U.S. foundations. But your examples are very different, and they're very concrete. So can you talk a little bit about those?
Yes, I can. We try to do something where normally a little amount of money is creating a big change. One of the examples, and I think that one of the speakers later on today is going to mention that, is a project which we call, I think I pressed the wrong button or something, somebody else did. It's a project called Loop City. Loop City is a very traditional thing in the suburban areas. In Copenhagen, we have this plan, a finger plan, where you have Copenhagen in the palm, and then you have all these 5 directions out of Copenhagen. And it's always been a problem how to connect across the fingers. And we said, we have to there's 10 mayors along this line from the 5 fingers. There's 10 mayors, and there's 1 Lord Mayor, and there's a responsible minister for traffic and transportation. And they have been discussing all kinds of different solutions for a lot of years. And we said, maybe if we just trying to make it possible for them to take a decision. So normally a foundation would come with hundreds of millions of dollars trying to create the solution. We came with $1 million and a secretariat and some people who could think a solution. We make a tender, and BIC was winning that. And you can hear one of the partners from BIC later on. And BIC is thinking big. We just asked them to connect the 5 fingers, but they connected all the way up to the north. This is going to Sweden and all the way around. And we haven't realized that. But this plan here, within 10 months, the Danish government and these 10 mayors made a solution where they spent more than half a billion US dollar creating a light rail. So this little part of money created on the right scene, bringing the right people together, created a very interesting way of solving a problem. Another example is suburban areas, non-profit social housing, where we're trying to bring partners together, local authorities, housing association, government, bring them together. And instead of doing it, we have been spending billions of dollars trying to have these areas to work better. And I'm not saying we have the solution, but we're trying to bring new partners along the table. So we don't donate the very big amount of money to make these houses better, but we donate the money to try to bring the right people domestically and internationally to the table. So that method has shown very helpful for our perspective, trying to solve some of the very difficult problems in your society and in our society.
Now, part of what we're talking about today is it gets into the issue of planning and how you do what you're describing on a scale. So the Loop concept, around transit clearly requires planning. So does this. So how do you approach the issue of planning as a foundation in supporting that work?
We do a lot of initiatives about planning, and again, we try to help bring the right partners along the table to set a new agenda. Maybe the word trying to have a new mindset. A lot of the issues mayors in our society is struggling with is big, complex problems which cannot be solved by them alone. And I think one of the main thing after COP15 in Denmark was that it was obviously that the leaders of the state couldn't solve the climate problem alone. And I think maybe everybody says that it was a failure, the Copenhagen COP15, and for some reasons it was, but I think it was an eye-opener that the climate issues cannot be solved by the state leaders alone. They have to cooperate with mayors, they have to cooperate with private sector, they have to cooperate with civil society, and the same in the planning way. And we're trying some different places to help local authorities. Here in Billund, which is a headquarter of Lego, we're trying together with BIG, and a lot of places we do it with companies you know, Gale Architect or BIG, and a lot of places we do it with companies you don't know. But we're trying to bring the right partners in together with the excellent staff of the local authorities, the mayors, maybe the government, maybe other private partners, trying to, with a little amount of money, to make a huge financial gearing. So a new mindset is easier. It's easier for the mayors to do difficult decisions if they're inspired and if they can get evidence for some of these things. So we do that in Billund, which is a very interesting place, interesting example. We do that in a suburb to Copenhagen called Ballerup, where we have taken a lot of suburbs. We had a campaign, a call around suburbs, and we're getting more and more pinned to the point that sustainability is very important. We have to make more dense cities. We have to have less sprawl. And some of these plans, bringing the right partners around the table, makes it easier for the cities to take decisions that they couldn't take alone. So I think the system we do it is trying to inspire. We do this in Odense, where 40 years ago they took Odense as a mid-place of Copenhagen, where Hans Christian Andersen was born, and they took the mid-city 40 years ago and ruined it with a 4-lane highway going right across the mid-city. Right now we have removed that road and trying to create livable space for bicycles, for homes, for people, instead of just for cars. So we're trying to do this. In this place, it's not just about bringing new people around the table. In this place, we're doing investments, trying to do this, but still gearing it so we can do a lot more than we could do just with our money.
And not just locally, you're working internationally as well.
We mainly work domestically in Denmark, but we do something if there's a story, if there's a hook to put it back. And one of the examples on international work is C40. Together with Children Investment Fund Foundation from United Kingdom and Bloomberg Philanthropy from United States, we financed C40 in 2014, 15, and 16, which is a very good example on bringing leaders together, bringing mayors together from big cities and innovator cities, trying to facilitate that the knowledge is going around the world. When you're talking about DVDs and music, copying is illegal. But when you're talking about livability, copying is legal. Copying is a way of doing it, trying to take ideas and try to have them work other places.
And you're, I was thinking about your mention of the word sustainability and how you're going about that. And there's an article in this morning's Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, I don't know if many of you saw it, but a column by George Will, a reprint of a column, prominent US conservative columnist on these issues, who attacks sustainability as coercion. Is this something that you encounter in your work before we move to the next slide about how you work? Do you encounter that sort of negativism as you talk about sustainability?
For us, trying to focus in which is very American inspired, trying to focus in 5 programs and 10 initiatives. Sustainability is not an initiative by itself, but all we do is we try to do it as sustainable as possible, trying to be problem-driven, trying to find ways of solving some of the sustainable problems. So definitely we try to push the sustainability agenda in all kind of levels, both you could say domestically, but the reason we go to C40 is that a lot of the sustainability, the CO2 emission and the pollution, a lot of these factors is not created in the individual countries or in the individual cities. They don't know borders, so we have to do this together. We don't see a critical dimension on what we do on sustainability, and we don't see a critical dimension for real in our society. We have done a lot of things trying to remove waste, try to use waste for district heating. Copenhagen now have district cooling too. We're trying to do a lot of these things, and I think it's an agenda not only for the politicians but also for the people. People like that agenda.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about how you do that. We have in this room people who are developers, designers, architects, people who are in the foundation world, in the nonprofit world, in the government world, academic world. I'm looking around the room and thinking about who I'm missing, but we have all of these sectors represented. It's a very typical Pittsburgh thing to see at a gathering like this, the folks from the community who actually are in a position to make a difference. How do you put those pieces together in your work?
It's very, very, very seldom we take a project and do it by ourselves. I would say foundation work 10, 15, 20 years ago, very often was one project, one foundation. And for a lot of foundations worldwide, it's been very important to have this bronze plaque saying, this is donated by. For us, it's important to know that we have been there because we have to have legitimacy to donate the money. But for us, it's not important to be there alone. For us, it's always important to be there together with somebody else. So we use a lot of energy trying to be the enzyme who finds the right partners, trying to find the right from the academic world, to find the right place to do this in the local authority, trying to find the right other foundations. And I would say right now we have 680 projects running with a total investment around $5 billion, where we donate half of it. And in 80% of these projects, we have partners from other foundations. So it's been very important for us to work together with other foundations. We learn from it, and that's why we are in C40, besides the climate angle. Being so close to Children Investment Fund Foundation and Bloomberg is a very good learning process for us, and hopefully we give something back to them as well. So this about facilitating that the right people are meeting is a very, very important part of our strategy.
And I'm trying to lead into a really nifty slide that you have that illustrates your working philosophy. So I'd love you to expand on that, if you would.
Yeah, you can say that's the way we say what we have to do is make co-creation. We cannot solve the big problems by ourselves. And I think my example before from COP15, I think is very important. And there's a lot of people touring around with a slide saying, if mayors rules the world. And I think that is almost as wrong as if state leaders ruled the world, because they cannot do this without each other. Mayors can be very clever and very talented, and I think we just met one of them, but they can't do it without the framework from the legislation. So the government has to set some frames, the mayors have to fill them out, but do it together with civil society, business leaders, individuals, volunteers, all kinds of people. So if we're going to solve some of these extremely difficult problems, the very complex one, we have to lift us up in the helicopter and make this new mind-setting agenda saying we cannot solve these problems alone. We have to do it together. And some of these problems are so complex that maybe we cannot solve them, but for sure we cannot do it alone. Maybe we could do it together. So our philosophy is to work very problem-driven, very agenda setting, trying to take some real agendas, and being a member-based organization, we have some legitimacy to do this. We are not politicians. We work together with society. We don't work against society. We're trying to help to find the ways around problems, trying to go out in the world to try to find good solutions that we can build on and help with. So our aim is to bring things to scale and have the guts to advocate good solutions. And that is extremely fun and an extremely nice place to work, but it's extremely helpful methods too.
You seem like a guy who would speak his mind, so talk about the courage piece a little bit, and why it requires courage to take on these issues.
It's very important when you do this that you are based on fact. You're not based of your gut feeling. You're based on facts, you're based on figures, you're based on evidence. And if you have to raise very difficult agendas, trying to bring people together who are not usually like to work together, bring them in the same room, try to have these people. We cannot solve the problem on the agricultural parts of Denmark if we don't bring both the environmentalists and the farmers together in the same room, and they're not the people who dance together usually. So we have to bring them together and create a room where they are safe in discussion. And being the part who facilitates that, we have to be trusted. We have to be trusted that we don't take very rare agendas and that we're not based on truth or facts, at least not truth, but facts. So we try to do that, and it works. Sometimes we say something that people disagree in, and then we stand for what we're saying if it's based on evidence.
So bringing people together, basing the conversation on fact, I think a lot of us in this room would look at this diagram and think this is also a Pittsburgh model. We'd have a few more mayors involved in your Loop City concept. We'd have about 135 rather than 10. So maybe it's a little higher order of complexity. But what would be your last parting message to Pittsburgh about what we should learn from the work that you do?
I agree that the complexity is higher, and maybe it requires a little bigger meeting room. but the method is the same. The method is the same. You have to trust each other, and you have to trust to open the door to bring other interests and other parties in, because you cannot solve the complex problems by yourself.
Jesper, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now, it's in fact no accident that Jesper and Grant look like two singer-songwriters. The guitars are coming out, and they will actually finish with the Simon and Garfunkel of urban sustainability. I think it's an act that should continue. Jesper, again, the reality check. What are the prospects for these guys? What do you see? What have you heard? How do you feel about what can happen next for P4 and the city?
I think there's an extremely good energy in this. I think the program, the initiative, the ambitions are so high. So there's a lot of hope. There's a lot of. I totally agree on the perspective that the mayor said earlier this morning, that this can work, and this is a city with a lot of perspective. It's a beautiful city, has a lot of perspective, and bringing all these people together is a very good initiative.
Okay. Grant, give us a quick flavor of what you took away from the Nordic tour that culminated to some extent in Jesper's presentation. What is your sense of the relevance of that of the experience that you saw in October?
It's two things, John. One is Pittsburgh is in a pretty good place. We have enormous assets. We do a lot of the things that we should be doing to move forward. But the second takeaway is that the world is moving fast, and on anything that we want to take credit for and celebrate, take, for example, the redevelopment of the riverfront. When River Life started that work, that was new. And now cities around the world are doing it and moving fast on every front that we want to be competitive on. So I think the other takeaway was there are other places we can learn from, and we ought to learn fast.
Guys, do you think you're going to carry on collaborating, or are you just going to get on a plane and head off? What's next for this conversation between you two?
That's a forced marriage, isn't it?
I'm hustling.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think right now the issue is how do we continue to learn from each other? How do our cities learn from each other? One of the guests in the room is a guest from Copenhagen Business School who is talking with folks at Carnegie Mellon
about a collaboration between our cities. So I hope to see a lot more of this.
I agree. You just brought us from being some country singers to go straight to the bar. But I think we can learn a lot from each other. And that perspective we're always open for.
Great. Learning
is the way of having a better world.
Fantastic. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Good work. Thank you. Okay. So these chairs are going to be removed. Now, I've, in my wildest dreams, often wondered what it would be like to be the moderator of my own 15-minute session. In 45 minutes, we'll probably find out. No, I want to share with you my own report from the front lines of sustainability in science, policy, and architecture. And I'm just going to take 3 bites at that and give you good news, bad news, and some outlook in each of those components. And so let's kick off with science. Now, why we want to talk about science is relatively straightforward. We need facts to know the state of the environment. It's not simply a moral question of what people may want or not want, and that's pretty crucial. Now, the good news, and there is some pretty profound good news from the scientific side of environmental sustainability. The good news in 2015 is that we know what the bad news is. I mean, the reality is now we have enough data in at enough resolution to say, yep, here's the problem with water, here's the problem with climate, here's the problem with resources. And increasingly, there's consensus around that. So this diagram you'll be seeing a lot more of in the coming decade, because essentially the science conversation on sustainability is stabilizing around this, which is called the planetary boundaries model, pioneered and developed by a bunch of guys in Stockholm, no less. But it's not just that it comes from Stockholm, it is actually the model that there is a convergence around to discuss the science base of the environmental crisis. And so what's going on here is confrontation of the data, and that's a good thing. Now, the problem is this. We don't know what to do about that problem, the problem of resource limits. And I don't mean we don't have good ideas, because we've heard a bunch of good ideas. What we really don't know, we're talking science here, is what is the scientific way to confront resource limits? That's a fascinating question. Now, my experience of this was based in my work at the United Nations. I wrote for the UN Environment Programme their framework policy on sustainable urban lifestyles. And to do that, you have to analyze consumption patterns, both resource and consumer behavior patterns. And what it discovers is there's very, very weak science in defining what consumption is and how it really works, how it really translates material transformation to value. And so I went away from the UN and started researching that on a PhD program with Tim Jackson at the Department of Engineering in Surrey, at the boundary of engineering, resource flows, and economics. And I had an amazing scientific breakthrough after 2 or 3 years. The breakthrough was, this is freaking hard. It's very hard to understand how resources translate into value. But if we don't know how that works, we won't truly ever have an answer to the problem of limited resources, a finite planet, and in principle, unlimited interests for human potential and development. And so, just as a kind of full stop on the report of what's next on the science side, what's basically next is resource-based economics. We have to get there somehow, and there's been efforts in the last half century, essentially, to get us there, but we have to do them better. And I want to see, in Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon become leaders in analytical, computer-based economics, because it's time we started using real data and massive computation rather than slightly fictitious models that economists think of on their coffee breaks. The opportunity to create science-based economics is with us, partly because of computation. Just going to share this diagram with you. This is what's called a Sankey diagram. And if you've never seen one, you should start enjoying them. This is a model of how resources flow through any system, whether it's a city or a nation. And this is what we're going to have to start seeing in our national accounts. Where are the resources going, and how are they being translated to value? Because if we don't do that, we are not responding to environmental limits in a scientific way. This is what I'm excited about on the science conversation. We know the limits. We're trying to get to grips with true analytical solutions, and we'll see what happens. Carnegie Mellon, get the computers spinning up on resource-based economics, please. So standards, Policymakers, decision makers, the non-commercial world, the world of conversations about important things, often lands on standards as a way to define progress towards a social good of whatever sort. And so that's where a lot of sustainability has ended up, a conversation around standards. And there is good news in the conversation on standards. The good news on standards starts with this, is there are more and more standards that make sense. They define sustainability in a useful way, they're technically credible, they speak to a specific community, and those standards themselves are becoming standard. There's a sense in which they become universal to a specific conversation and a specific community. Good news. And obviously you will recognize in Pittsburgh LEED as one of those standards that has some standardized character. PNC Bank ought to be called out for being very strong in leading on LEED and environmental sustainability in their buildings. They pioneered that. But there is bad news, and the bad news on standards is this: the standards are not high enough. If you take all LEED buildings across all categories of LEED certification, you have approximately between 5% and 10% energy efficiency increment. For all the razzmatazz of LEED, that's not a lot. And it's nothing close to the 50, 60, 70 net zero numbers that Hal talks about and the sustainability data requires that we reach towards. So something's not quite working there. And one of the things that's not working, it's just too expensive. To do a LEED certification adds quite a significant premium in the design process and the capital build, and doesn't necessarily bring payback over the life of the building. The standards aren't high enough, it costs too much. And one of the reasons why that all gets stuck, why we have those problems, is actually standards don't create value. They're not valuable enough in and of themselves. And so if you take LEED and look at it in the round, yes, it stabilizes the conversation on sustainability in the architecture and the urban profession. But I would say it stabilizes at the wrong level. The aspiration is set too low, and the expectation of absorbing costs is out there and leads to comparatively slow uptake of really ambitious projects. So it's not surprising that we need to look beyond that. And so what I find interesting about coming to know Andre is that what he and the Heinz guys have done in town is trying to look for what's next in sustainability. And I have a sense that one of the reasons why P4 has come to be is a hunger for going beyond LEED, a hunger for finding what's next in the mix. If we talk about standards and the debate on sustainability, in particular in architecture, we have to find standards that are better and add value, but don't cost anything. They have to deliver value, deliver quality, but not cost anything. And how would we do that? Probably through something much more rich than a checklist, something that looks like a design methodology, not just an engineering checklist. Now, you might recognize this logo. It's a thing called the Living Building Challenge. It's the logo of the Living Building Challenge. Now, the Living Building Challenge is not a checklist of how you do sustainable design. It's basically like a design philosophy. When you ponder the universe and come up with a bunch of principles, it'll look a bit like that. And you might think that that's all very esoteric and totally useless. In actual fact, the greenest building in Pittsburgh right now is certified to Living Building Challenge. It's the Phipps Conservatory it's the Center for Sustainable Landscapes up at the Phipps Conservatory. And when you go there, you discover a couple of things. It works in terms of resources. It also works in terms of being a great building. You walk in there and it feels good. Quality, value, limited premium on the capital spend, and a fantastic return over the lifetime. And so we need to go richer, go more deeply into what standards are trying to accomplish by looking at the dynamics of each industry. And in this case, we're talking about architecture. One of my colleagues and clients in Stockholm, I've worked with over many years now, but in the last 3 years, we've been working on not just an abstract methodology that the industry tells us to use. We've built a methodology from the ground up based on sustainability best practice and integrated it into their office methodology. They're a medium-sized office. They've taken 3 years. We worked together to create one methodology for how they do design. Not a green thing on top of their old thing. This is it. And they're rebooting that pretty much here at P4. So I'm delighted to see that what I've been saying to the industry as an architect and environmental scientist in the last few years is starting to break through. Standards are good, but they're not good enough. They'll cost you, and they won't add value. Let's find a way to take it deeper. So this is what I want to share with you as my parting shot and the exciting frontier that I think I'm part of and I'm enjoying contributing to, and I want Pittsburgh to lead in relation to sustainability and the built environment. There is a new paradigm, I have to use that word at least once today, of built design, where sustainability is baked in. Doesn't look like green stuff, doesn't look like moralism. The environmental side, environmentalism is all gone. It's built on hardcore analysis and the front end of what happens in design. And let me share 4 themes with you, which I think are pretty comprehensive as to what is necessary to lead in the new sustainable built design. And these themes are as follows. Data. Hello? No, I've jumped ahead in my slides. Let me kick that off again. So if we talk about the new built design, let me wind this up properly. I'm rushing because the clock is telling me to shut down. I want to share with you first the bad news on sustainable urbanism, the prospects for sustainable urbanism. And the bad news is this: cities are enormous things. Physically, they consume 60 to 70% of all resources of the human civilization. And they are complex, large entities that are the epicenters of resource consumption. Not only that, the worst thing about them is they're dumb. They don't, they are inherently passive and sit there and allow resources to be consumed in the system. And when we look at urbanization, for example, in the Far East, there's lots of exciting examples. Hal gave us some of what's happening in China, but there's tens of thousands of examples that are not exciting. The scale of urbanization, which does not have a new strategy for sustainable built environment baked into it, is vast. And it's very depressing when you look at the statistics there. But the flip side is very interesting. Cities are massive, and that's a good thing. They become coherent targets for manipulation, for management of resources all in one go. If we need to deal with human resource consumption at scale rapidly and have some hope of doing it, cities are sufficiently big for us to make large interventions at scale that are credible. And to some extent, because of that scale issue, they are responsive. Physically, they're passive. Institutionally, they're responsive in ways that nation states are not. Here's an example. P4. This would be incoherent at the national level. You couldn't have these people and these voices in the room and expect to get something done. It'd be a free-for-all. And so what's exciting is to see exactly the promise of a city. It's a big, complex problem. There's lots of resources being consumed here. But it's sufficiently optimized at scale. That is the nature of a city. It is optimized at scale to be a vehicle for response. And I think these 2 guys are helping to really lead this forward. They have a muse whispering in their shoulder, and I think he'll be very influential in the coming years. But responsiveness is crucial. You have to work at scales that matter. Cities are big enough to cause damage. They're also small enough to be the places where you can achieve massive change. So what's next? And this is where I jump to in my enthusiasm. 4 themes to take us through what I think are the highlights and the key elements of truly sustainable built design. Data. We have to get the data and we have to manipulate it correctly. We have to understand that demographics are transitioning. We have to understand what density is and how it works. And we have to understand we live in a technological age. And devices will be our friend, profoundly so. So let's have a quick look. Does anyone know what this is? You can call out when you have a little view. What is it? Ideas? Energy use? No. What? Twitter, no, but not bad. What this is SMS usage around the holiday times. That's Happy New Year, all right? And the point is this: there's rich information all around us, but never in human history have we been able to capture it in real time at scale, let alone manipulate it and process it. And so when people talk about the cloud, pretty much forget everything, but know this: everything that can be computed, will be computed, should be computed, and if you're not doing it, watch out. Mickey McManus will probably tell you something very similar. Everything that can be computed will be computed, and if you don't use it, don't get it, you don't use it, you're not in the game. There is no conversation on sustainability at the urban scale, let alone the global scale, unless we are saturated in interesting data. We've got to find it, we have to manipulate it, we have to study it, and then we have to deploy it. So here's an example of that in practice. Autodesk is the premium provider of design software to the architecture industry, and they keep on pumping out free stuff, which blows one's mind in its sophistication and blows the economic prospects of consulting companies that used to sell this stuff. This is a tool called Vasari that is a free tool for energy optimization at the architectural and urban scale. And it has real-world data built into it, operating in real time. Draw a model, position it, geoposition it, run the numbers via the cloud, and it will tell you how effective it is within seconds for free. That used to cost tens of thousands of dollars and take months of consultancy time. Data counts, and it's going to save us. So demographics is changing, and you can't design cities around old models of society. Airbnb is a fantastic example, not so much of the startup economy, but of the demographic transitions that will drive change at the urban scale. People are living quality lives in ways nobody would have believed even 10 years ago. The idea of sharing your home, making a little money on the side, all this stuff is evolving in real time. And it's based on demographic transitions. Why that's the case, I don't know, but it is happening. And we have to confront that. We need to know what's next. And we can't assume that people want a two-car family or they want a garden. Let's see what they really want. Let's study the demographics and let's exploit that. Now, when I was working with BIG, the Danish architects Krista Jesper mentioned, on one of the largest office buildings in Sweden in the last 6 months, the predominant subject matter of discussion was actually demographics. We had to design the largest office building for the technical, for the civil servants in Sweden. How do we do that? Actually, what we did is study what they want to do with their time. How do they work? How does the community relate to the building? Demographics was actually the driving force in the design. And that ended up being what led us to, we didn't win the competition, but we came second in the competition, built on demographic sophistication, rather than design genius, just studying what people want. This is a project I worked on with another Swedish company. This is Hyllie on the border of Malmö, which Krista was planning. What we responded to here was solving almost as many problems as possible through density: food consumption, transport, energy. We built an energy system, a food system, and a transport system based around where you position the buildings. When I was at the UN, I came in and we were talking about transport. Within a few years, we were talking about mobility. And then, of course, some magic happened. We started talking about access. You don't need vehicles to get access if you design dense. It's not rocket science, and that's what the Nordic region is really contributing to hugely in the design conversation. Density solves things. Don would be annoyed if I thought that the Nordics were the only people talking about density, because his urban colleagues are also pioneering that. Final point is this. I was also involved in the project team to redesign Kiruna, which is a city inside the Arctic Circle. We have to move the city center because it's collapsing. It's over a mine. Fascinating project. And it's infinitely complex in terms of urban requirements. Every possible thematic requirement, programmatic requirement is in there. But what actually came out was most interesting to me. Well, the opportunity, once you get to that scale of complexity, was this: get the devices in place. So I designed, in addition to the other urban interventions, a lifestyle app that plugs into most of the components of your urban lifestyle. And that was based on my architecture diploma work. And I think that's going to happen. I think I'm already contributing to some versions of that project, and I'd love to see that stuff happening here. Leverage your devices to achieve massive change at the urban scale. And so that's a little run through from my front line of the transition from sustainability as alarmism. Sustainability is punching 911, to sustainability as first response, to getting out there and seeing how we can contribute. Solving the problem of resource limits by adding value rather than adding cost. So that's my contribution. Hopefully it's useful. And then I'm just going to round up the planet session. What we've tried to do with this session, basically, is shift the conversation from where you might have thought we'd be going with a planet-themed session, which is the planet's in crisis, let's get to grips with that. But I think we are sufficiently to grips with the crisis itself, the data of resource limits and damage to the natural environment. And so where do we go from there? The thesis that I've tried to present to you through these speakers that we've presented is that what's happening now is, whether it's business development, whether it's energy strategy, whether it's urban development, or whether it's philanthropy and the leveraging role of foundations, that sustainability can be part of the engine of creating physical settlements at the large-scale cities, but also value in business and social terms. Krista was very specific about how His contribution to sustainability involves solving people's lifestyle problems at a very fine-grained level. Jesper was very specific about how using the resource engine, financial resource engine of the building sector in Denmark, they can create a virtuous circle whereby allocating money from their construction, from the successful private sector building industry, goes back to re-engineering a city that where those buildings people can thrive in those buildings, and the city itself is durable and worthwhile living in. Maria is excited about the potential of sustainability to be a driver of growth in Stockholm, and she's already on top of the industries that are post-industrial, post-resource intensive. She thinks that the coating industry she knows the coating industry is already an engine for a development in Stockholm, and that's what's becoming the case here. And finally, Hal. Hal is in the thick of the transition right now, and as you can see from his 4 key themes, there's value to be extracted if you invest now and play the long game in looking for zero carbon, zero net energy solutions at the urban scale. So what I've tried to do is tilt the conversation from one of crisis to one of value creation. Hopefully this has been a useful session for you. Coffee's ready, we're not too far over the time, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the day and the rest of the event. Great, thank you so much.